Next, we're going to talk about syntactic requirement patterns. They are quite helpful to avoid mistakes while documenting textual requirements using natural language. They're also sometimes known as requirement templates, and syntactic requirement patterns are defined as a syntactic structure for documenting requirements in natural language and defines meanings of each part of the syntactic structure. And a good pattern contains a condition, a subject, a legal obligation, a verb, and an object. Which sounds a little bit abstract now, will probably become a little bit more clear when we work ourselves through the syntactic requirement pattern using an example. So on the left side, we start with the when or under what condition. So condition under which the function documented in the requirement is performed. Could be temporal, when, or logical, under what condition. And there could also be one or more, so you can have a concatenation of those. Then next, we're going to talk about the system, like the system name. Name of the system that shall provide the functionality is also the subject of the sentence. And then we're going to decide whether it's going to be shall, should, or will. Shall is a legally binding requirement. If a statement does not contain a shall, it is not a requirement. Should is a highly recommended feature, optional, non-contractually required, and more like goals instead of requirements. And then will is a statement of fact. Example, if I want to tell you something about another system, I will use will. So first, when or under what condition, then the system, and then shall, would, or will. Next, we're going to talk about the verb, like what actually should be done. So it could be a process, but it could also be something that provide whom with the ability to, or be able to process like what is supposed to be done, the verb. Then we're going to get to the object and potentially additional details about the object, may be relevant or not. Objects for which the functionality is required, e.g. which document shall be printed. And if we now look at the specific example with some color coding that we're going to use here to highlight like which part of the syntactic requirement pattern are we talking about. So we have the requirement, if the glass break detector detects the damaging of a window, the burglar 3000 shall inform the head office of the security service. So first, when part of our SRP, if the glass break detector detects the damaging of a window. So you have like a when there. Then which system are we talking about? The burglar 3000. Then it's a shall, a should, or a will. No, it's a shall, which also means it's a requirement. And then the process, what is it supposed to do? What's the verb? Inform. And then the object. Who should be informed? The head office of the security service. And this is how you very nicely can use syntactic requirement patterns to properly define a textual requirement. But how do you now get a requirement into the form of a syntactic requirement pattern? What we're displaying you right now is a pretty good approach on how to do that. First, you decide on the legal obligation, is it a shall, a should, or a will. Then you determine the requirement's core, like the process, the verb, what is it doing. And then you characterize the activity of the system. Is it an autonomous system activity? Is it a user interaction provided by whom or to whom? Or is it some kind of thing like an interface requirement? Be able to do something. Then you insert an object. What's the object here? And then you determine the logical and temporal conditions. And then you already have your syntactic requirement pattern. And that brings us to the end of our lecture on textual requirements documentation. What are the key takeaways that you should remember from this lecture? First, natural language is very versatile and a good means for requirements documentation. The problem is that the versatility also allows for ambiguity, and you should be aware of that. There are multiple forms of ambiguities and you should be able to avoid them. Guidelines help you for writing good requirements documentation. So we looked at the style guidelines and some of the most common and most important ones. And we also looked at syntactic requirements patterns as a fixed structure for requirements documentation that also can help you to avoid ambiguity, but also to design and create good requirements documentation using textual means.